Part 1. The light in the window. It was supposed to be a fresh start. That's what everyone said. A clean slate, a quiet lake house, a chance to write again. No deadlines, no husband, no one asking her to smile, and she didn't feel like it. Just pine trees, Adirondack fog, and the endless surface of Lake Placid. But on the second night, Emily saw the light. She had arrived in Lake Placid, New York, on a gray Monday afternoon in mid-October, the kind where the leaves had already burned to amber and red and the tourists had mostly left. The house, a 2-story cedar cabin with moss-covered shingles and a wraparound porch, was a last-minute find. She wasn't here for charm. She was here to disappear. The divorce had finalized in June. The headlines had faded by August. By October, New York City was unbearable. Too many faces, too many memories, too many things to pretend. Lake Placid had been her mother's idea. Years ago, "I used to go up there as a girl," she once said. "There's something about the lake. It listens." Emily needed something that listened. The house sat at the edge of a narrow dirt road that led nowhere. Across the lake, through a thin veil of mist, stood another home. Older, larger, Victorian bones, sagging porch, paint worn away to gray. Her realtor had said, "Nobody lives there. Been vacant for over a decade. Some family from Albany owned it, then just let it rot." That night, after unpacking half her life into drawers that didn't yet feel like hers, Emily poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the deck. That's when she saw it. A light. One window on the second floor of the house across the lake, glowing warm and golden. At first, she thought it was a trick of reflection. The moon, maybe, but it flickered. Then a shape moved behind it. She stared, heart thudding. Someone was in that house. The light disappeared after 5 minutes. Emily didn't sleep. She didn't call anyone. Who would she call? Her editor? Her ex-husband? She told herself it was probably a squatter, a hiker, a prank. Lake towns were full of stories, weren't they? The next night, it happened again. Same window, same light, same figure, unmoving, watching. Emily stood by her own window, clutching her phone, and stared back. At exactly 10:21 p.m., the light vanished. She went into town the next morning. It was sleepy, quaint. There was a general store, a cafe called Birch and Bean, and a sheriff's substation with one patrol car out front. She spoke to the barista, a woman in her 20s with a septum ring and flannel shirt. "Hey," Emily asked casually, "do you know anything about the old house across the lake? Big one, gray paint, kind of falling apart?" The barista froze for a half second, then shrugged. "Yeah, that place? It's empty. Has been for years. Creeps me out." "Do people ever go there?" She shrugged again. "Not unless they're stupid." Emily smiled politely, but her skin prickled. She stopped by the sheriff's station. The deputy on duty was a young man with sandy hair and a nameplate that read Dunning. She explained what she'd seen. Dunning listened, nodded, and said, "It's probably just a squatter. We'll send someone out to check." He took her number. That night, she kept all her lights off, sat in the dark, waited. At 10:18 p.m., the light across the lake blinked on. This time, the figure stood closer to the window, still, watching. Her phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't recognize. Nothing there. "House is empty. You're fine." Dunning. She looked up again. The figure was gone. On the third night, it rained. The lake shimmered with ripples and wind. Emily sat at her desk, trying to write. She hadn't written in months. Her mind was fogged, not with words, but memories. Her husband's voice. The sound of lawyers, the feeling of being talked about in news articles by people who had never met her. She got up, made tea, returned to her desk, and found something on it. A piece of paper, folded once, plain white. She hadn't seen it there before. She hadn't opened a window. She hadn't left the door unlocked. She unfolded the paper. 5 words. Stop looking across the lake. Part 2. The man no one remembers. Emily didn't tell anyone about the note. Not the barista, not the deputy, not the neighbor who waved from across the road. She didn't even tell her sister when they spoke on the phone later that week. It felt too strange, too fragile. Like saying it aloud would somehow make it worse. Instead, she started watching. Every night at exactly 10:15 p.m., she turned off her lights, poured tea, and sat by the window with binoculars. The light across the lake didn't always appear, but when it did, it always came on at 10:18. It stayed for 6 or 7 minutes. The figure behind the glass never moved. She began keeping notes. Night 4, light on, no movement. Night 5, light off. Night 6, figure appears, steps away. Night 7, window open, no curtain. Night 8, no light, but boat noises heard. The entries made her feel grounded, rational. She had always been a reporter at heart. Facts before fear. But none of this made sense. The house across the lake was supposed to be empty. So who was watching her? She went to the Lake Placid Public Library the next day. Not the little tourist annex on Main Street, the old one, deeper in town. With dusty shelves and fewer smiles. The archivist, a gray-haired woman named Nancy, showed her how to access digital microfilm. Emily searched property records. The house across the lake had last been owned by an Alan Kessler, purchased in 1996, listed as vacant since 2012. No sale, no transfer, no forwarding address. That was the first time she saw the name, Alan Kessler. She searched the local newspaper archives. Nothing at first. But then, in an issue from 2011, buried in the back pages, local man missing, Alan Kessler, 52, last seen near Mirror Lake. The article was short, no photo. It mentioned he was a seasonal resident, had a history of mental illness, left no note, presumed drowned. She printed the article, kept reading. 3 weeks later, no new leads in Kessler case. 6 months after that, sheriff declares case closed, no foul play suspected. That was it. No follow-up, no obituary, no family statements, just vanished. Emily took the article to Deputy Dunning. He met her on the porch of the substation, holding coffee in a chipped Adirondack mug. "You said nobody's lived there in years," she said, handing him the paper. Dunning scanned it, shrugged. "Yeah, that's Kessler. I was still in high school when he disappeared." "You know what's strange?" Emily asked. "He went missing in October. This exact week, 12 years ago." Dunning sipped his coffee. "Lake takes people all the time. But his body was never found." "Big lake," Dunning said. "Deep water." She stared at him. "Someone is in that house." Dunning gave her a slow, tired look. "We checked. No footprints. No power. It's locked from the outside. And nobody's supposed to be there." He handed her the article back. "Maybe you're just seeing what you want to see." That night, the light came on again. The figure moved closer to the window. It raised its hand and waved. Emily stepped back. She dug deeper. Kessler had no immediate family listed, no social media, no online photos. But the Lake Placid newspaper office had archives going back to the 80s. She drove there and asked to search by name. The receptionist was kind, chatty. "We've had a few people ask about Kessler over the years, usually ghost hunters. His house is kind of a local legend. Kids dare each other to paddle across and knock on the door. Emily's pulse ticked faster. Why? Because people say he never left. Light goes on sometimes, but no one's there. Has anyone ever seen him? She thought. No one I know. Back at the library, Emily asked Nancy for older town records. She searched property rolls, land transfer records. Finally, she found something strange. In 1987, the house had a different owner, a woman named Claire Bennett. It was only listed for a year, then sold to Alan Kessler. Claire Bennett, the name itched at her. She flipped through her mother's old photo albums that night, one she had brought from the city but hadn't yet unpacked. Tucked in a sleeve was a Polaroid. 3 people standing by a lake, 1 woman, her mother, 1 man, smiling, 1 house in the background, unmistakably Kessler's. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, Claire, me, and Alan, Lake Placid, summer, 87. Emily dropped the photo. Her mother had known Alan. Part 3, The Family Secret. Emily stared at the photograph for a long time. Her mother, Claire Bennett, and Alan Kessler. Summer of 1987. Smiles, sunshine, stillness. All of it captured in faded Polaroid hues. Her mother looked young and relaxed, the way Emily barely remembered her. Alan was in the center, one hand resting on Claire's shoulder. There was something unsettling in the familiarity of the scene, as if her mother hadn't just known Alan, they had been close, too close. The next day, Emily drove to Saranac Lake, about 15 miles west. The Essex County Records Office was there, and she hoped it might contain more than what the local library offered. She pulled up every available file she could under Claire Bennett. There were 2 birth certificates, one for a Claire Ann Bennett born in 1948, her mother. The other was surprising. Claire Bennett, legal guardian to Alan Kessler Jr., 1987 to 1989. She blinked. Guardian? The file didn't say why. No mention of parents, only temporary custody. Alan Kessler Jr.? She double-checked the name in the property archives. The man in the house was Alan Kessler, no junior. So who was the child? She called her aunt, her mother's sister. Do you remember anything about Mom being in Lake Placid? A long pause. Why do you ask? Because I found a photo of her there, with someone named Alan Kessler and a woman named Claire. Her aunt sighed. That was a strange summer. Your mom left for a few months, said she needed to get away. It was after the miscarriage. Emily's stomach flipped. What miscarriage? Another pause. She was 6 months along. It was a boy. She had never known. Her aunt continued. She never really talked about it, but she came back changed, distant, quiet. Your dad said it was like a piece of her stayed behind. Back at the house, Emily opened a box at her mother's old belongings. Inside, tucked in a notebook from the late 1980s, she found a series of letters, most never sent. They were addressed to someone named Alan, the same handwriting as the photo. I don't know how to tell you this, but I think it's happening again. I feel the pull, the fear, the dream of the lake. He keeps appearing in the window. Same night, same time. I'm afraid of what I saw that summer. I'm afraid it's not over. You said he was gone, but I don't believe you, and I'm scared I brought something back with me. Emily's hands shook. There was a dream her mother had told her once as a child, a recurring one. A man behind glass, a light blinking in an empty room, a voice whispering her name from across the water. Emily had always thought it was just a story. Now she wasn't so sure. That night she didn't watch the lake. She watched her own house. She turned off all the lights, pulled the blinds, and sat in darkness. At 10:18 p.m., the light in the other house blinked on. But this time, it wasn't alone. A second light, lower level. Then movement. Not just one figure, two. The next morning, Emily paddled across the lake in her canoe. The old house stood silent and gray. Its windows reflected the morning fog like blind eyes. She climbed onto the dock, heart pounding. The door was still locked, but someone had left something for her, hanging from the handle. A necklace, her mother's. She recognized it instantly. The small silver pendant, a leaf, had once belonged to her grandmother. She hadn't seen it in decades. Taped to the back of the pendant was a note. 4 words written in her mother's handwriting. "He never left, Emily." Part 4. The lake remembers everything. The canoe rocked gently beneath her. Emily stared at the house across the lake. Her fingers wrapped tightly around the silver pendant, her mother's pendant, hanging from the door of a house that was supposed to be abandoned. The words still echoed in her mind. "He never left, Emily." The handwriting was unmistakable. Her mother had been gone for 24 years. She didn't tell anyone she was going. She waited until dusk, packed a flashlight, gloves, and a crowbar. The wind was soft, the lake almost unnaturally still. Not a single ripple as she glided toward the other shore. The house loomed larger as she approached, tall, weather-worn, its windows dark and cold. The paint had peeled in long vertical strips. One shutter hung sideways, creaking on rusted hinges. She climbed onto the dock and stood for a moment, listening. Nothing. She reached the door. It was locked tight, the kind of old-fashioned bolt lock that hadn't been manufactured in decades. She forced the crowbar into the frame. Bracing herself, with a groan, the door popped open. The air inside smelled of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic, like rust or dried blood. She stepped inside. The house was quiet. Each footstep on the wooden floorboards echoed like a drumbeat. The front room was empty, no furniture, just dust and shadows. The wallpaper was a floral pattern, faded to ghost gray. She turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark like a blade. In the hallway, here were framed photographs. Faces she didn't recognize, except one, Claire Bennett, smiling, standing beside a boy. The same boy from the lake photo. The same man who had vanished in 2011, Alan. The kitchen was untouched, dishes still in the sink, a cracked coffee mug on the counter, a note on the fridge, yellow with age. Gone walking, back by dark. A. Emily ran her hand along the counter. It was thick with dust. She moved to the staircase. Each step creaked beneath her weight. Upstairs, the hallway split into 3 doors. One open, an empty guest room. One closed, the bathroom. The third was locked. She pressed her ear against the door. Silence. Then, barely audible, a soft click, like someone taking a picture. She stepped back. She forced the door open. Inside was a bedroom, and it was not abandoned. Fresh sheets, lit candles, a desk with neatly stacked notebooks, a cassette player on the nightstand playing white noise, and on the far wall, dozens of photographs. Of her, some from across the lake, others impossibly close. One from the cafe, one from her porch, one from inside her kitchen. Her breath caught. She turned and saw the closet door open slowly. A shadow moved. She ran, down the stairs, out the door, into the dark. She didn't stop until she reached her house. She locked every door, closed every curtain. Her heart thundered as she replayed the images in her mind. Someone had been watching her for weeks, taking pictures, waiting. And whoever it was, they knew her. The next morning, she called a private investigator from Albany, a woman named Dana Chavez, recommended by an old editor. Dana arrived that afternoon, professional, skeptical, but sharp. They went through the photos, the letters, the pendant. "I believe you," Dana said, "and I want to find out who's living in that house." She returned the next day with news. "There's no death certificate for Alan Kessler," she said. "Only a missing persons file. But guess what?" Emily leaned forward. Two teenagers went missing in 1988, same year your mother was in town. Both were last seen near the lake. She handed over a photo. One of the missing boys looked almost identical to Alan. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat by the window again. The light came on. But this time, it wasn't just one window. Every light in the house blinked on at once, blazing like a signal. Then one by one, they began to shut off, until only the upstairs window remained. The figure stood there, and slowly it raised a hand and pointed at her. Part 5. The Other Side of the Water. It was all leading here. The light in the window, the photographs, her mother's pendant, the faces in the walls of that house, the whispers of history that no one in town would talk about. And now, the figure across the lake, pointing at her. Emily didn't sleep. At dawn, she packed a bag, flashlight, recorder, spare phone battery, knife. She didn't know who she'd face or what. Dana, the investigator, insisted on going with her. "If this is what you think it is," she said, "you're not going in there alone." They waited until nightfall. Then they crossed the lake. The house loomed like a memory no one wanted to touch. They entered through the same front door Emily had pried open days earlier. The smell of damp and metal was thicker now. The air had weight to it, like the house was breathing. The stairs groaned beneath them. At the end of the hall, the bedroom door stood open. Candles flickered inside, and the closet door was ajar. Dana reached for her flashlight. Emily held the recorder, thumb trembling over the button. Inside the closet was a narrow passage, wooden, jagged, leading down, a hidden staircase. They followed it. The passage opened into a basement that wasn't on any floor plan. Stone walls, an old cot, shelves lined with labeled boxes, letters, tapes, photos, clippings, and in the center, a table. On it, a journal. Emily opened it. October 14th, 1987. She's pregnant. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Claire is angry. She says it's not safe to keep it." October 27th. I heard the boy again. Same voice, same knock. No one else hears it. November 9th. He came back. I watched from the attic. He waved, but it wasn't me he saw. December 2. The lake took them, but they don't stay gone. January 5th. She said he's mine, but she lied. He belongs to the water. The handwriting grew worse, more erratic. Dana flipped to the back. "These are dated through 2011, she whispered. "After he disappeared," Emily said. "No," Dana replied, pointing at the most recent entry. October 19th, 2023. She's watching now, just like her mother. But she doesn't understand. He never left. He never will. Emily felt the chill before she heard the voice. "Put that down." They turned. A man stood at the base of the stairs, gaunt, barefoot, pale eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "Alan Kessler?" Dana asked. He smiled. "Not anymore." Emily's breath caught. "Then who are you?" "I was Alan. Then I became what she left behind." He stepped closer. "The lake gave me back. It always gives back. You came here for answers, but some answers don't belong above water." He reached for the table. Dana raised her flashlight, hard and fast. It cracked against his temple. He dropped. They tied him up, called the sheriff. The authorities arrived hours later. Alan, or whatever he had become, was taken into custody, muttering about water and windows and voices. The house was sealed off. Investigators found remains beneath the floorboards. 2 boys, missing since 1988. In the weeks that followed, Emily gave the journal to the police. She gave her story to a local reporter. She gave the pendant to the lake. She kept one photo, the one with her mother, Claire. And Alan, smiling before everything broke. On her last day in Lake Placid, she stood by the shore. The house across the lake was boarded up now, quiet, still. But she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. He never left. The lake shimmered in the wind, and just beneath the surface, she thought, only for a moment, she saw a face, watching. The end.